All right. Today's webinar is about the 10 key points to consider before pursuing a doctorate in business administration, or perhaps a doctorate generally. And as a learning outcome, we hope that you will have a better understanding on what to look out for before embarking on a doctoral and how the structure and format of the program that you decide to start with will also impact your progress through the doctoral journey. So with this, I'd like to welcome Professor Dr. Kevin Boeh and Professor Dr. Stephen McCabe for today's webinar. And my name is Andreas Meisner. And with this, let's dive into the 10 questions. So, 10 key points. The first that matters, it's the structuredness of the program. You will find theoretical coursework, and there might be applied learning phases, and there will be also self-directed learning phases. So the first provides a theoretical base, the second trains the skills that are needed, and the third will develop your independent scientific research capabilities. Stephen, might I ask you what is developed when, where, and how?
Well, look, I mean, what we're talking about in research is the idea of exploring empirical phenomenon. Now, of course, that sounds quite advanced. It can be sort of a bit daunting, but ultimately, remember that the doctoral journey is about sort of contributing to knowledge. And my view is that sort of knowledge starts from sort of theory, and theory is another sort of word that is often sort of misunderstood, because theory is just explanation of which there is a logical sort of, well, you want to, for want of a better word, a logical sort of understanding of what the base of the problem is and how you advance it. Now, the thing about sort of a practitioner degree in a sort of a doctoral program such as, or a professional doctorate in particular, is you're looking at sort of things in practice. And therefore, of course, there is a sort of an appreciation that you sort of identified something that is perhaps wrong, because as I say, we sort of use the expression problematize, that there's some aspect that you think is worthy of sort of better understanding. And by better understanding, you can sort of advance the sort of way in which it is dealt with, or preparedness, and in organizational terms to sort of to improve it. So essentially, sort of coming back to what this is about, is that sort of that you will be expected to have an understanding of the theory in terms of producing a piece of coursework, which of course will sort of build up in terms of the finished thesis. So yeah, that's, if you like, the sort of the background where you are contributing to. But in the sense, the sort of the applied learning is what have you sort of derived from practice, and how have you sort of been able to sort of to frame the issues that you're looking at with direct relevance to sort of theory. And of course, this is the sort of the clincher, whereas a PhD, it largely starts with theory and then you go and test it. It's kind of the other way around. You start with practice and you find the sort of the theory, or you sort of select the theory that you believe is most relevant. So it can be, and I do sort of provide the sort of the health warning here, it can be a slightly messy process. So it's not sort of quite so sort of didactic and so linear as laboratory-based research, quite clearly. But of course, as I say, once you immerse yourself in it, you can sort of start to sort of to, as I say, use the sort of practice as a way of examining the relevance of theory.
Thank you very much. Kevin, is there anything you would like to add to that?
I think just to complement the one point on the order, you know, in a traditional PhD, perhaps you might be more likely to start with theory and then go find something to which to apply it. Whereas with a DBA, a professional doctorate, it may be quite common to actually have discovered something in your practice, to have discovered something in your experience, professional experience, you know, that prompts a question for you. And then you, in a DBA program, develop the tools to go and look at that problem, turn it into a research question, and then build and develop the skills with which to test it.
Right, thanks a lot. Are there any questions from the audience before we move else into the next question? All right, then the research scoping. It's a thin line between freedom of choice and getting overwhelmed and stuck. Now, students are often given the freedom to explore and formulate their own research topic. Whether or not that's fair is another thing. Because the very same freedom often is constituting a barrier towards progression. So how to balance those two extreme ends? Kevin, might I ask the question to you?
This is a big one, and it's actually a stumbling block, I think, for a lot of people that I've seen in my experience doing doctoral programs. You can't start with a question that is overly large. And this is, we're not going to walk into this with the ability to, let's say, develop an answer to the meaning of the universe. And then on the far other end of the spectrum is that sometimes research questions in people's PhD and doctoral questions get too small. And so we have to find some balance in the middle between the two. The idea is if you end up with a question that has an answer of 9, or yes, that's far too small. What you're doing here is we're trying to have some sort of a contribution. We need to identify a whole. And how do you identify a whole? Well, first thing you need to do is to read the literature. There may already be an answer to what you want to study. If so, it's out there. This is one of the great elements to the process that we go through, is your supervisor may have a good sense of the literature, a good sense of the existing knowledge, and you're going to go look for that whole. Now, what is that whole? Very often, something very similar has been done. And very often, you're going to find some way to vary it, and you will then be able to make a contribution. It's what makes it interesting. How do you do that? Well, let's say you find an existing study that you find is incorrect, or you think is incorrect, or you surmise, gee, they didn't do it the right way. You can vary at least one element should be varied, and you can come up with a new something interesting question. So you can vary the theory that's used to explain a particular phenomenon, and you can perhaps study the same question that's been done before. You can look at the methods that have been used. Let's say new methods have been developed in in academia that can better explain or better study a particular question. Well, you can apply the same, use the same research question, but with a new method, and maybe you find a different result. That's interesting. If you look at the data that were used, perhaps the data set that was used was too small. Perhaps it was specific to a region in the world. Perhaps it was specific to a particular industry. Well, maybe it applied to manufacturing, but if you ask the same question and look at it with respect to, let's say, service industries, does the same hold? That's interesting. Furthermore, there are temporal questions. Let's say that we found in the literature a result that was very, very convincing in the 1970s. What happens if you try that again today? Is it very different? Again, these are ways that you can go and you can scope a research question into something that is doable. And this is how the process works. It helps you go from something that is an enormous question into something that is a doable, feasible type research question.
Right. Stephen, is there something you would like to add?
Well, again, just to add on to that and to be entirely sort of complementary, it's this whole aspect of boundedness in my 30-odd years experiences of supervising students at every level, and including doctoral, is that there's a sort of if there's a danger of people selecting a problem which is too narrow, for which the answers are obvious, it's more like that students select problems which are sort of the world and everything. And the greatest problems are often that sort of where you do cross-disciplinary work, and that often happens in organizations, and you want to look at something about leadership and motivation and culture and whatever else, and it becomes, if you a bit like a sort of a spaghetti. It's got lots of ingredients, but it becomes overly complex. And again, to keep it sort of short, because of course you could talk about these things all day, it's the idea of a sort of a problem that will have uniqueness, because of course that it is about contribution knowledge, and the data you produce should be unique and novel. But of course that there's various ways of sort of looking at that, so don't let that put you off. But more particularly, that sort of what you do is, as Kevin just said, taking a sort of problem which has been looked at before, but taking a different perspective. But as I say, it's the sort of the boundaries of making sure that what you do is you're not trying to sort of to conquer too many battles at one time. Perhaps just to leave you, there was a book I remember when I was doing my own PhD about 30 years ago, How to Eat an Elephant. And of course, the sort of the simple answer to that is you eat it one bit at a time. You can't do everything in one go. And there's another sort of the analogy of climbing a mountain. You come a mountain in stages. So you take something which is significant, and it's going to sort of take a tremendous amount of effort. But as I say, we recognize the sort of the challenges and do it in such a way as that you don't become overwhelmed.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Let us move on to the next question, which is actually in parts related to some of the things that were discussed at the first. Now, understanding and navigating the research problem, the research question, and the outcome expectations. So the three of them do belong to each other, and they relate to each other, and depending on how you shape one, the other might change. Now, how does one assure that there is a consistency across the three? Kevin, might I ask you again first?
Sure. If you're looking for consistency across the thing, again, going through the process, and if you go through the process correctly of a doctoral program, there will be consistency. And this is the role in part, and I know that's a later question about the supervisor and sort of sticking to the process. Backing up a minute, what is the sort of research problem? Oftentimes, especially in a DBA program, it may be phenomenological. We may be asking a question about profitability, or we keep doing joint ventures that continue to fail over time. And so, there's this sort of domain of knowledge, and there's a problem that I want to study. How do you turn that into a research question? It needs to be something a bit more studyable. And so moving from the problem of, let's say, failure of joint ventures to the research question, why are my joint ventures failing? What is it that there's some specific element that is probably causing them to fail? And that may be where you're narrowing down a research question to look at the joint ventures, and then to look at, let's say, whether it's just your organization or if you want to look at other organizations, et cetera. In order to get to that research question, you have to ask, what is the outcome I seek? And so in this case, I would like to have a set of tools. If we understand why joint ventures are failing, then we can have some recommendations as to how we can perhaps do it better, or perhaps how other organizations can do it better. And so there's that linkage, which is you start with this larger body of research problem, things are failing. You're bringing it down to a set of factors that may be causing it. And then the outcome I seek is, I want to fix it. I want to have recommendations for it. The outcome is required in order to have, or the expected outcome, and what you want to get from the research is what's expected, is what's required to make the research question feasible. And that's how you can narrow it down. And again, process. We do this process, you do with a supervisor who's helping you through all of this, and you can narrow it down the way you need to.
Right, so it's a very structured process one needs to understand and learn. Stephen, any point from you?
Well, again, to be absolutely complimentary to what Kevin has just said, if you take this as a statement there, our organization must be more innovative. The question I'd be asking about this, well, says who, in whose benefit? And of course, it becomes a definitional sort of aspects of what is organizational innovation. So you have to sort of then be able to sort of define this thing in pretty sort of precise terms, because of course that's your starting point. And from there on, and of course that will require sort of being acquainted with the sort of the literature, and particularly of course the contemporary literature. One of the sort of the problems that students often have is that they're looking at sort of a problem, and of course they're trying to relate it to literature, which is probably a bit too old. And I would say that anything that's over sort of 10, maybe 15 years old, it still may have relevance, but always go to sort of the most contemporary sources and research that's been carried out. And so something such as that, because of course it's a sort of really sort of it has a real real sort of aspect of this. In organizational innovativeness, it's about a lot of things which, of course, until you start exploring beneath the sort of surface, you know, as they say in America, lift the sort of the hood of the car and see what's underneath, then you'll start to discover what the issues are. And, you know, dare I say, in my own sort of research into sort of management, only by understanding what the sort of the impediments to change are, if that's what the sort of the nature of the sort of the endeavor is, that's how you start to be able to sort of to problematize, which is a word I've used a couple of moments ago. You know, what is the sort of problem? How do you frame this into a useful question? And then how will you get sort of valuable empirical data through which you can sort of analyze, explore, surmise, and indeed, you know, another approach which I'm really fond of is engage in sort of action research. Try something, see what happens, monitor it, and then in terms of sort of the iterative loop, if it doesn't work the way you expect first time, there's probably lots of good learning, which of course will be valuable to your own doctoral research. Then try something different again. And dare I say it, this is how organizations work on a day-to-day basis. You know, this is the nature of sort of practitioners, but of course, for a sort of a scholarly practitioner, or those who are sort of doing a sort of practice-based doctorate, you're trying to sort of to all the time take this sort of data and sort of look at it from the sort of the perspective of existing sort of established knowledge or theory, because even though the sort of dare I say it, and my final comment is that practitioners are often not guided by theory. That's the sort of the world of academics, and that's the way that you'll be examined in terms of your doctorate contribution to knowledge.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Fourth question, fourth point. The research topic and the role of the supervisor and who else is supporting the development. Now, let's assume you have an excellent supervisor who's well published in organizational culture and intelligence. However, your research suggests that the research problem actually is on financial management. So what are you doing once you figure that out? How do you resolve that apparent dilemma? Can you continue with the same supervisor, or do you need to change, or what other strategies are there at hand? Stephen, might I ask the question to you first?
Well, a very simple answer is that if you're doing something on financial resource management, then the logical import of that would be that you're supervised by somebody who has expertise in financial management. And it's not to say that sort of somebody who's done organizational culture and intelligence wouldn't be appreciative of, because of course it is often about the sort of the process of supervision as opposed to the topic. But I would also say, and maybe it depends, we're talking about supervisor singular. I would also say that sort of you could have a sort of a couple of supervisors, you know, and that's perfectly sort of feasible. Indeed, it's to be sort of recommended. And you would have somebody certainly on, well, in this theoretical, or this hypothetical sort of example, somebody who understands cultural intelligence, which of course is a very valuable way of understanding organizations, but somebody who is going to sort of to major in the sort of financial resource management. What you've always got to remember is the sort of, it's the end process. And the sort of, in essence, the discipline in which you sort of frame your research, or the sort of the research problem it emerges from, that's likely to be the sort of the well, that will dictate the sort of the nature of the examining team. And perhaps it's just, you know, for a moment, just think about this, that normally you're examined by at least two examiners, one of whom is an expert in the sort of subject, and it's usually sort of the external examiner, and one of whom is an internal examiner who is got expertise in the sort of the process. There's a delicate balance to be sort of struck here, and my experience is that sort of most supervisors are able to sort of to cross the sort of discipline, because, you know, a good supervisor knows the difference in a good piece of work and a not so good piece of work. But all the time, you know, as I say, if you want to do something in discipline A, then don't go to another discipline, because of course you're missing a trick, as it were. And the other thing, of course, that I would say is that the person who is steeped in the sort of the particular sort of discipline that you are going to major in, they will have the sort of the you know, they'll be familiar with the sort of the territory in terms of what's being published, and also sort of the people to go and speak to in terms of sort of helping you to sort of to develop your work, and also the sort of the right conferences to go to, and of course finally in terms of selecting the examining team. So it's a dilemma, but you know, there are issues where of course you start a sort of piece of work and you think it's about something, and your work shifts, which is often the nature of organizational research in particular. And you know, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that you change your supervisory team. It's not ideal, But what I would always sort of stress is that you must go with the people that you feel comfortable with and that you are confident are going to sort of see you through the journey.
Thank you. Kevin, is there anything you would like to add?
It's yeah, well said. I think if you think about it this way, in theory, any supervisor should be able to walk you through the process, because we've all done that process. We've all taught that process. We've led that process as supervisors. And so the steps in the process are the same. The difficulty is that, as it turns out, if you're trying, for example, to identify a hole in the literature in financial resource management and joint ventures, well, there is somebody who has much greater and deeper expertise. If you're trying to apply transaction cost economics as an overarching theory, it's great to have somebody perhaps who has expertise, a supervisor who has expertise in the application of that theory and the theory itself. If you're trying to employ a particular set of methods, let's say they're qualitative methods, or you want to do survey work, well, it's quite helpful to have somebody who has expertise in that. We've all been trained in many of these fields and many of these methods, but the more you can get somebody who has some specific expertise, the better off you'll be, the more efficient the journey is going to be, the less you'll have to go seek outside counsel and outside examiners and outside support. Summarizing a little bit, though, if you think about it, if your supervisor already knows the answer to what you're studying, perhaps you've chosen the wrong research question, because it isn't something that needs to be studied. So what you have to realize is there is no perfect supervisor. There is no supervisor you're going to find who has used your methods, used your theory, studied your industry, and on down the line. The fact of the matter is every one of these journeys is a little bit unique, and you do what you can to find the best person. And again, rely on the underlying truth that we've all done this process, and if you move down the process, you'll be okay. A good supervisor as well will identify and know their own limitations and say, look, I'm not an expert in a particular set of research methods. Let's bring someone in who can help. And therein lies the role of a supervisor in part.
All right. Very interesting. Let's go into the next question. Fifth point. Why the research method will lend itself to you, and how related studies are your greatest friend? Now, it's not uncommon to students to dedicate a great effort deciding on the most appropriate research method. I would argue lots of energy goes in there, and students are very quickly on settling on that. But what's often less well considered is that research is evolving over time. It's something growing naturally, expanding, and frequently time is needed to develop also a deeper understanding of the nature of the subject matter being researched, known as ontology, so to fully appreciate it. It's a growing piece of work. So how and when will you find your research method in that? I ask Kevin first.
Sure. It is true, and people spend a great deal of effort and time choosing which methods to use, and that's a good thing. They really should. It's very simple just to go and say, I'm going to use quantitative and OLS regression is my friend. And because that's, if we look at it, that's actually what's taught, generally speaking. If it's taught in a program at the undergraduate level, you may have learned OLS regression. At a master's level, I've taught in numerous MBA programs, and that's the primary sort of method that we teach at that level. There's such a much broader array of research methods that one can take, and they may, and this is where you really have to work with the supervisor to figure out which is the appropriate. Backing up a step, there are multiple sort of types of research methods as well. There are qualitative and quantitative. You may look, and again, this isn't, we don't have the time. It would take perhaps weeks for us to go through the list of all of the types of research methods out there. But just generally speaking, qualitative is something that oftentimes is not empirical. Something is not quantitative. It's something that you just can't quantify. Now, in my own approach, I tend, even in qualitative study, I try to turn them into something numerical because it's my nature. I really love something where I can turn it into numbers. The other element of, or the other half of it is quantitative methods. And an interesting way to do this is if you go and you open, for example, Stata, which is, of course, one of the big statistical packages. And you go and you do the drop-down boxes and you look at what are all the empirical methods or the quantitative approaches that you can take. And there are literally hundreds of them in there. I don't know if it's hundreds, but it's dozens and dozens. And at the end of the day, there is no way to be an expert in every single one of them. And you're going to have to walk through this process to find which is the appropriate one. You're going to have to understand basic quantitative, assuming you're going down a quantitative route. You have to understand which of those is appropriate to your particular question. And again, you'll learn that, you'll figure that out in the process.
It's all about processes. Stephen, anything to add to this?
Well, as Kevin said, we could be here for a very long time. Again, always remember that sort of the whole point about sort of methods, it's the correct tool for the job. I always sort of say, as a sort of a very crude example, that if you'd never seen a sort of saw and a sort of an axe, and somebody told you to cut a piece of wood in half, yeah, the axe will cut the piece of wood in half, but it'll be a pretty sort of ragged job. The saw is the better one. But more particularly, it's about respect for the phenomena. I mean, the word epistemology is used, and of course that's the selection of the method, but also I would bring in the word ontology, and the ontology is the sort of the way, and yeah, these are sort of ancient Greek terms, but nonetheless they have sort of relevance in research methods. It's about respect for the phenomena. If you're studying something scientific, say metals in, I don't know, aircraft design, yeah, you go into a laboratory and you test them because, of course, they perform, we hope, in very sort of consistent ways. If you go into an organization, and this is the sort of where I did my research, scientific methods do not work so well. I know there are plenty of people who talk about sort of scientific methods and scientific research methods used in management and try to put things into sort of numerical terms. But the reality is that people don't behave in that way. They are not machines. Therefore, of course, you have to have sensitivity to sort of the people that you're working with and talking to and observing. So, that leads me to sort of believe that sort of qualitative methods to sort of to use that expression is far more appropriate. But ultimately, and I'm not sort of saying to one or another, you've really got to sort of be able to steep yourself in what the sort of the research philosophy is. And most particularly, remember that when you get to sort of the end, it's about convincing the examining team that what you've presented in terms of sort of the most particularly the literature, but more particularly sort of the data that you've presented and made sense of is done in such a way as it's disciplined and it has logic and relevance and is persuasive. And that comes back down to sort of the particular methods that you've chosen to use. And I again, remember, I didn't say methods. You can use a sort of range of methods, and that's fine. The only thing is, of course, by using a range of methods, you create more work for yourself and you have to straddle two sort of opposing camps. But there is this idea to use one or another. But I'm perfectly happy with mixed methods so long as you can justify what you've done.
Let me jump in on that. Absolutely. If you're putting a paper together, generally speaking, if you look at the top journals at this point, you have to approach a problem in from a couple of perspectives and use a couple of different methods. Use something. Let's say you have empirical data that you've used for a question, but then you complement that with something from a qualitative perspective, a survey, a set of observations, action research, something. It makes for a much, much stronger paper.
Absolutely.
All right. Let us move into the next question. Benchmark.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Bostjan.
Welcome.
Welcome. We are in the middle through, Bostjan, but we invite you into the discussion. We just start with the sixth question, which is encountering benchmarking opportunities, learning together and learning from others. Benchmarking is a great way to learn from and with others. I mean, benchmarking is something you anyway do through your day-to-day. So it's important. Hence, scientific conferences and other methods of getting connected and learning from others are very important and can assure that you develop well. How and where can students find benchmarking opportunities through the research journey? I Bostjan, do you want to, or Stephen, who wants to go
Well,
first?
I was only going to chip in because I wrote a book on benchmarking about 20 years ago, or maybe a bit longer, and actually it was crudely sort of described as being stealing up. Benchmarking came out of sort of the quality movement, which of course, you know, I will hand over to Boston in a second because of course it's his area of expertise as well. And when I was doing my PhD on quality management, the Japanese, in terms of automotive and electronics, were seen to be the sort of the best in the world. And it's a bit like sport. If you want to be the best, you've got to learn from the best. And you know what I would sort of say is that if you know people are working in your area and they're more advanced, learn from them. You know, because of course they'll have made lots of mistakes that you will inevitably make, and of course people will learn from you. And that is what I would always say about the sort of the academic community. It is meant to be a community where people talk to one another and they share experiences and they help you along. But I'll hand over to Boston because I say it's his specialist area.
But yeah, I mean, we could talk about all of us actually. I mean, it's not the issue. Once again, I don't know if you have now divided each of the questions for one person is okay, but theoretically, I mean, what I liked here is that you wrote that students should go actually around and check the others or be actually part of different conferences. I mean, I have done with my students, with my PhD students, all of them. I have sent them all the time actually around to different conferences and to different, usually they're pre-conference seminars for a PhD students and stuff like that. And that was really, really useful for them because they have spoken to the others, they have seen where the others are, they have seen what are the issues actually the other students are having, and they have actually spoken, discussed all those things. And after, in the evenings during the conferences, we spoke a lot to these students as well. So that was definitely for me one of the best opportunities to benchmark against the others, where they are, at what's their level, everything about methodology and stuff like that. But on the other side, what was interesting that I have seen how the other students were actually progressing with their supervisors. And in a way, I was always happy when they came back and they told us actually, yeah, what we are doing is not so bad. That was actually for me important as well. That they say they have seen, my students have seen that the others have struggled actually even more than they have. So that was for me important stuff. But yeah, you should be there as a student. You should be there. You should, because most of the universities anyway. Do we have that? We don't have that probably, but we should maybe install that as well. Most of the universities have some funds for the students. You know, there's a small portion of the fee they are kind of actually using for the students to buy licenses or to go to conferences and stuff like that. Usually they have about, I don't know, 1,000 to 2,000 euro or something like that across the program, and they are actually then able to go to 1, 2, or maybe 3 conferences. Or sometimes they get even support from their companies or something like that. But yeah, important stuff that they go out there and see where they are. And these are good opportunities for those pre-conference seminars, as well as actually being part of a conference and simply present and get feedback. Through that, you are actually starting your networks as well.
I'll throw in a quick comment there. To Bostjan's point, absolutely. The amount that you learn from going to a conference and presenting a paper, when you sit in whether it's at a conference or if you're doing a brown bag seminar at a university with a group, whatever, the feedback that you get, the discussion that ensues is some of the most valuable time I have in my entire existence. When you have, dozens or several people sitting around discussing a particular method or topic or paper, it's an incredible element of the journey. And you learn so much. Everything I think I've learned, generally speaking, I've learned from somebody else. And this is the way that you go do that, is by networking, by benchmarking, comparing. There's another element that comes as well, that, there's learning about the topic and the process and the doctoral journey itself. But there's also a little element of learning how better to manage your supervisor as a student, how to get the best from your supervisor. That doesn't mean you're managing your supervisor per se, but talking to other people, you can get some great ideas for how much time are you getting, how do you, best utilize that time, how prepared do you need to show up to your meetings with your supervisor, and it can make the whole process much, much more efficient and effective.
All right, managing a supervisor. Okay. Let us move into the seventh point, progress measurement. And the availability of regular control points, or the lack thereof. Knowing how to measure progress is really helpful, and seeing what you have achieved is something that needs to be done. In selecting a doctoral program, a crucial question is just, what are regular control points, and where can they be encountered? Kevin or Bostjan, who of you wants to go first on the air?
I'll kick it off quickly and then turn it over to Bostjan. But yeah, what I want to add, maybe just to set a framework, you can't manage what you can't measure. And I think at the end of the day, there is this logical, sequential, not purely sequential, but set of steps that you go through in this journey, in this process. And, there are people who are going to take slightly, elements of it are going to vary by person, because they're going to be more intensive in a particular step, perhaps, or more questions to be answered. But at the end of the day, if you can go through that process, measure, set yourself a goal for when I need to get there and what I need to have done at that point in time, and you measure your progress to that point, into that checkpoint, you're going to be successful in the journey. And I think that's one of the primary drivers for people who drop out of these programs. Bostjan. Or
I mean, for me, I would say that the kind of regular control points were all the time communication with the supervisors. That's how I see it. I mean, first of all, definitely is usually the comprehensive exam or whatever it is. In our case, actually, is the conference, and that is what we should say, actually, that actually we are building upon conferences in order actually to provide students with good feedback points, as well as the quality of the feedback. And then for me, that was actually important. I mean, the issue is that different students think or grow in a different direction. And some of them are perfectly fine that you are giving them feedback based on their chapters, how they progress. Some of them like that, but the others don't. The others are kind of writing in a different ways. Some people do really write it, actually, first chapter, second chapter, third chapter, and that are kind of the control points. Or is it now a framework, or is it the research question? These are the points where I have built actually always kind of for my students, but depending on their, how should I say, personalities, because some of them are really kind of, rather focused or rather structured. The others are a little bit more, I don't know, how should I say, painters or something like that, and they see it in a different way. But yeah, that's, I guess, important that you do have those points, from my perspective, from the chairs in our case, or from the supervisor's point of view. I mean, different universities do that in a different point, and that is the comprehensive exam. And then you are lost, or you are perfectly fine, it depends. If the supervisor is not there to guide you, check on you, give you feedback and stuff like that, as well as students alone should seek feedback and kind of push for these control points. Because if you never deliver anything, then you cannot be kind of measured. And that's why our program is not bad, because we are really trying actually to set at each, let's say, module, kind of control points and feedback to the students in order to understand where they are. So that's how I would shape it a little bit in that way.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, is there anything to add, or do we move on to?
No, just to say, I mean, all programs these days, they have regular sort of checkpoints built in, and it's often done through sort of committee process whereby they monitor your progress.
How many points do you have? You have
well,
2 points.
it's normally every 6 months, which of course is reasonable, because of course you should have made progress quite precisely to sort of identify when people are in trouble. One thing I would always say is that there is a little bit of a danger that sort of people think that it's a sort of it's a linear process, and it can be that's perfectly possible, and that you sort of do the introduction and you do this and this and this, and you sort of build it up a bit like a kit. But my experience is, particularly in the sort of the organizational work or domain in which I've been based in, it's an evolutionary process, and you do bits in different chapters, and it kind of all starts to come together. But of course, it's often more difficult to monitor that. But hey, this is another one that, as I say, when the penny drops, so this, as the expression goes, it all starts to fit together and it makes sense. And the initial stages can often sort of seem very daunting and very confusing. And of course, this is where you sort of need the sort of mentors, your obviously your supervisors, and of course the students around you, some of whom may have sort of gone through that process already.
All right. The element of time. What happens if I can't keep up the pace? And how do I stay connected? I mean, time is finite. Completing within a reasonable time is important. As more time as you use, as greater the likelihood for you to drop out. And so, for one reason or another, students often run out of time. And what comes with this is getting disconnected. So your peers continue, but you not. So you're left alone and you can't catch up. So how do you manage to stay connected, yet running at your very own speed? I ask Bostjan or Stephen, do you want to give it a go?
Okay, well, I would say quite simply, I mean, that normally a full-time sort of PhD program is 3 years, and a part-time is 5 to 6 years, and that they are sort of seen as reasonable averages, but people often beat those. But more often, in my experiences, people sort of go over, and it always comes down to whatever you do at the beginning, the sort of which is of course the most difficult sort of, part of the process. If you're quite clear about what you're doing and how you're doing it, so the sort of the topic, the method, the literature, you make your life easier. But of course, what people often tend to do is they're a bit unsure about their topic. They deviate from where they originally started, and of course it's perfectly sort of possible that the sort of the topic you start on may become problematic for a whole variety of reasons. Perhaps you've underestimated the difficulty of getting hold of empirical data and access and so on and so forth, and you then have to sort of shift. And certainly in my own one, I started with a very sort of positivistic approach, doing the numbers, and I recognized then, of course, that it's philosophically it was too difficult, so I had to sort of shift my emphasis and do it in a different way. Albeit, mine was on a sort of it was a part-time sort of program, which I still managed to finish within the 6 years. But what I would always say is that you have to recognize that if you're going to go into this process, you've got to dedicate enough time to do all the things that are required along the way. Don't underestimate. But of course, how will you know that? Well, of course, you talk to your supervisor. And I would always say, for a sort of full-time student, it's like a full-time job. And if you're a part-timer, then if a full-time job is 40 hours a week, and you can argue about whether that's adequate or too much, then you've got to be certainly as a part-time student. And of course, we're talking about practitioner-based degrees, and often they are part-time. You've got to be looking to sort of to carve yourself out on average 20 hours a week. The biggest issue I have found with students is that sort of they tend to sort of they bank time. They think they can do things in short bursts, and of course do little but do it often.
Stephen, don't say 20 hours per week, because nobody will actually then enroll. Forget it.
Well,
I mean, I do agree with you, but that is actually kind of killing every program, because 20 hours per week. You know what's 20 hours per week? That's actually the whole Saturday and the whole Sunday.
Well, it may be, but only a couple of hours an evening. But recognized, if you're going to make progress, you have to put the sort of the time.
I agree with that. Commitment and actually stay focused and stuff like that. But if we go with 20 hours per week, they will kill us. Everyone will kill you.
Well, who knows?
I completely agree, but nobody's. I guess nobody's able to do that.
Well, Chris,
part-time students.
I know this is not criticism, but I always sort of think that students have to be realistic. That undertaking a doctorate is the sort of the most significant academic qualification you can achieve. It's not done lightly or easily. So, but anyway,
Agree.
We don't need to argue. Well, Kevin, you give a different perspective.
I mean, I don't want to scare anybody off, but look, before doing PhD, I was an investment banker and I used to sleep at the office. I mean, I worked nonstop. There was a lot of perspiration, because it was work, constant work. There's 168 hours in a week. And the question was, how many of those can you fill doing deals? In PhD, while doing PhD, it obviously is more inspiration rather than perspiration. The idea is there was an endless string of texts and papers that I should have been reading, and I read as many as I possibly could, and I filled every waking moment doing so because I was intensely pursuing this. But look, backing up to the time element, I don't want to scare anybody off, but the idea is you need to keep yourself on track. You need to plan, execute, control, figure out where I am according to my plan to get me to an outcome, let's say at a 3 month, 6 month, 1 month, whatever checkpoint. And you need to manage yourself and turn up the heat or turn down the heat as necessary. But the second thing I want to say is that the very, very best dissertation is a completed one. And what you need to do is to make sure that you get that done. You can continue to enhance it and make it better. And perhaps your whole life as academia will be about continuing through with that topic. But the idea is to get it done by sticking to the process. And it's very doable.
All right. We're almost done, literally speaking, but also the 9th point is about being almost done. Why it all boils down to the viva and how to prepare for that day well ahead. So it's a 0 or 1, you're either a doctor or you're not. And well-prepared students are those that don't need much time to prepare for the viva. As a matter of fact, I didn't prepare a single day, particularly for that, because it took me 6 years to get there, or 7 years. So by that day, I was prepared. Now, how and where can students prepare for the final day? And this one is a clear question to Bostjan.
Clear question to me. Oof. I mean, I don't know if I think about mine, I will not start about that. But yeah, no. I mean, as you have said, the majority of the students do in a way feel that they are ready. Some of them are getting scared. I don't know why are they getting scared actually, because in case that, and that is actually true, is their work. It is your work. It doesn't matter. Did it, I don't know, take you 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, but it is your work. And you should be able to speak, to answer actually the questions what you have done so far. And usually, and especially, I would say most of the vivas are anyway kind of a discussion among academics who are usually not really critical or in a way trying actually to fail you, but they are just trying to understand what you have done and trying to see how you can explain what you have done. Definitely, they will always find actually some questions or some points where they can go a little bit deeper, but the idea is really not to fail you. However, that does not mean that you should not be really ready. You should actually go and discuss and have probing questions, I would say, from your supervisor. So the best way is definitely that you take a course, let's say what we are doing to prepare you for the viva, or that you really actually ask your supervisor and maybe another one of your professors who was actually kind of engaged at one point in the process of your PhD or DPA, and present it to them and really ask them to ask as many questions as possible, because that's the idea behind it, that you are able to answer every single crazy question. I mean, my how should I say, my view has been since ever that I have asked so many questions to my students as possible. And when I said, okay, now I don't have any, you're ready for the viva. And that's kind of the way how it should go. you should be prepared for every single question, which might kind of, you know, come across the mind of academics, and that's it. And then you're ready to go.
Kevin, anything to add to that?
So, yes, the idea is that you, that day, you know, that Viva or the defense, if you're, you know, in the US or Canada, essentially, you've been preparing for that day for 3 years, 5 years, 6 years in particular cases. The thing to bear in mind is that you in that room are the most knowledgeable about that topic than anyone in the room, of course, despite that the people in the room on your, you know, the examiners are experts in their own fields. And it is, you know, there should be, of course, you know, personality is going to be such that people are going to show up and there'll be some unease and a little bit of discomfort because you're being questioned by some very bright people. But at the end of the day, that's all you've been doing for 3 to 5 years. And so you are prepared for that day. And if you weren't prepared for the day, then your supervisor should not have let you progress to that point. So at the end of the day, you are the one who is the most knowledgeable, and the questions and the comments and the contribution that comes out of that, that's some of the most valuable hours of your entire life, because the comments that come, and I recall my own defense years ago, some of the comments that were made and the questions brought up turned into subsequent papers. Because they said, did you think about this? And then I went about and wrote a paper about that later. It wasn't a question about my research and my dissertation. It was more a comment about, wow, that's interesting. And what about this? So it's if you go through the process and you do what you're meant to do, there should be no issue.
But you should get prepared for it.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Okay, no, we are over there, guys. 2 minutes to 5.
Steven?
Or 2 minutes to 2. We have to leave. Anyway, I'm not sure that we're going to finish all 10 anyway. And I hope you will ask students to ask questions in between, Andreas. Just let them be part of it as much as possible.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay, final question. The aftermath of the doctorate. What to expect from a reconfigured version of you? So this is a question that's perhaps less well discussed. What do you believe you want to do in your future, and how can attaining a doctorate help you to achieve your aspirations? Why do you do it in the first instance? Kevin, do you want to give an answer to that?
Sure, I'll try to be brief. You know, at the defense, and you the Viva, when you're through with it, yes, you get a new title. Are you any smarter day, you know, Viva +1 than you were the day before? Perhaps from a discussion, perhaps. But at the end of the day, you know, you have this incredible set of skills. I think the big question then becomes, how are you going to use it? You know, and does it just make you better at doing your job, let's say with a professional doctorate, like a DBA? Or are you going to continue? You have this incredible, they're valuable, rare skill, which is research methods, and this process of going and addressing a research question and coming up with some sort of a dissertation or a study on it, and which has turned into your dissertation. I think the interesting bit is, are you going to continue that? And you don't have to solely be within academia to do that. If you're in academia as a job, as a professor, well, then your job is to do that. Your job is to continue contributing to the body of knowledge. But you can, even if you take a professional role, there are great ways to go about continuing to contribute by getting collaborators and getting people who stay or go to academia, and they end up being your collaborators and co-authors. So there's much more to, yeah.
It's 5, guys. Let us move.
Good.
Okay. See you on the other. That's another link, isn't it?
Stephen.
Sorry, in relation to question 10, I would just say, and in fact, I would always suggest that students put in a sort of section within the completed work that's submitted to the examiners, which is a kind of reflection. Not everyone's cup of tea, but I think that if the PhD is nothing if not sort of transformative for you, then it's not so much that it's failed, but you will think differently, and that ability to think differently and to sort of conceptualize and problematize and all the sort of the other words that you'll come across during the process are really sort of crucial in sort of making the sort of the finished person that you become, and hopefully sort of secure the sort of the title of doctor. But hey, the title is absolutely important. I accept that. But as I say, you will emerge as a different person. I certainly did, because as I say, that's the nature of a philosophical thinking, and it is a sort of philosophical degree, the ability to sort of to take a broader perspective and to sort of to deal with issues and come up with logical and coherent, if not solutions, certainly explanations. Which, and in the case of sort of what we're talking about, sort of a practitioner at DBA in particular, it's that ability to solve problems on a day-to-day basis.
Let me just, I have to throw in one thing, because Stephen, you just you kicked something off in my brain, and it's absolutely true. It is transformative. My journey into PhD, again, I was an investment banker. I was doing deals. I thought I knew everything. Perhaps not that much, but I thought I knew. Post PhD, I sit here and I am far, far, far humbler. And I sit here and I say, I actually know very little. If I think about the body of knowledge in my particular domain, I now know that I know very little. And that was the transformative piece that you speak to, Stephen. That's why I had to chime in on that. Bostjan, yeah.
No. I would just say that majority of the students don't see that they are transforming. But I guess us, the supervisors, see that, how they are transforming and how they became actually different way of thinkers, I would say, and how they debate, how they present, how they tackle things. They don't see it because they were in there and they have changed. But you, as the person who have seen them 3, 4, 5 years ago, you see actually that big change. And that's for me the best and the best, anyway, the best thing I can how should I say, see or do with my students, that I know that they will be actually different after a while, without them knowing it.
All right.
Okay. Are we moving now to another or not?
We are done. The 10 points.
Yeah, but it's 5 and 3 minutes, so we are late.
We will now go off the record. But before we're doing that, so we have a forthcoming webinar at the 13th of July from Stephen on practice-based research. So be welcome to that. And now we go offline. And then Lana asked,
Where are